Welcome back, our viewers, our esteemed crypto asset service providers. Um, you have been with us on this journey for this webinar series. We've done parts 1 to 4, and now the big conclusion on dealing with the travel rule. I'm joined again by Mo, and since he's the expert, I can just pepper him with questions and he's going to answer all the questions for us. So, Mo, let's start. The FIC, just to set the scene a bit, the FIC published Directive 9 of 2024. And Directive 9 deals specifically with the travel rule and the obligations on our crypto asset service providers as it pertains to the travel rule. It came into effect this year, 30 April 2025. Now, we as FSCA, conducting inspections on our crypto asset service providers, we've been assessing travel rule compliance. It's part of our scope. And I think it's highly appropriate for us to conclude in our webinar series the obligations on our ordering intermediary and recipient CASPs as laid bare in Directive 9. Again, let's break this up into bite sizes that are digestible, and let's perhaps just kick off first with the obligations on the ordering crypto and the intermediary crypto provider. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And certainly, I think an important and hot topic at this point in time. Taking note that FATF has also published some guidance and some recommendations indicating that the crypto asset sector should be adhering to what we call as the wire transfer rule, but in the CASP sector known as the travel rule. So essentially, transferring the information of a virtual asset or crypto asset transfer to another crypto asset service provider and recording that information, but in particular, the information with respect to the originator or the person that has instructed the crypto asset service provider to send that information, and then also verifying that information or verifying the beneficiary on the receiving end of that, Michelle. So you'd notice that in terms of the transaction value chain for crypto assets, you've got obviously an originating CASP or ordering CASP. You would then have an intermediary CASP if an intermediary CASP is being used, followed by a receiving CASP or recipient CASP, as we mentioned that in our directive. So it's important throughout the value chain that that information that's being transferred is securely transferred. It's being records of that information is being kept, and that information is being recorded and is able to be produced in the format that's required. So firstly, Michelle, touching on ordering CASPs, there's very specific requirements, as we've indicated in terms of Directive 9 that has been published by the FIC, indicating what specifically is required by an ordering CASP to capture from their client or an originator that needs to be sent with the transaction. So firstly, the ordering CASP must transmit to the recipient CASP specific information concerning the originator of a qualifying transfer as it relates to the originator being a natural person or a legal person. And here I think we must note, Michelle, that qualifying transfer is a R0 value. So it's important for crypto asset service providers to note that any value being transferred, the travel rule does apply. Secondly, an originator of a crypto asset transfer is the client of the ordering crypto asset service provider as contemplated in the FIC Act for the purposes of execution of the transfer. So when we refer to originator, we're referring to your client. The information relating to the originator that is transmitted to the recipient CASP must be subjected to the CDD requirements in accordance with Part 1 of Chapter 3 of the FIC Act and the RMCP that the ordering CASP is required to develop, document, maintain, and implement in accordance with Section 42 of the FIC Act. So obviously, as this originator is your client, you would have undertaken the CDD requirements, and in essence, you would have captured the required information from your client for that information to be transferred to the intermediary or the recipient CASP. The ordering CASP must transmit to the recipient CASP specific information concerning the beneficiary. And here we refer to, obviously, we understand that the institution might not have the particulars of the beneficiary. However, you need to obtain that information from your client. So when transferring this information, it's important to ask the client to where would you like the funds to be transferred to, and then obtain the details in as much detail as possible to allow you to transfer that funds to a beneficiary. An ordering CASP may not execute a crypto asset transfer if it cannot comply with the obligations set out in paragraphs 4.1 to 4.7 of the directive. And the ordering CASP must provide for the manner in which and the processes by which it will implement measures to comply with the directive in the RMCP. And just to touch on that, Michelle, I think having a manner and process is key, specifically when it comes to the travel rule. We know that there's various systems and tools that are out there, third-party tools that CASPs can use to allow them to comply with the travel rule. We also note that certain CASPs may use manual processes. Some may use certain systems which are interoperable with other systems. I must stress that it's the CASP's duty to ensure that they're using a system that they're able to transmit the information to a receiving CASP. Merely citing or indicating that unfortunately we have systems that does not correspond or speak to another CASP, you would essentially be in breach of paragraphs 4.1 to 4.7 of the directive, as you would not be able to transfer information securely to a recipient CASP. So critical to have those in place. Then we come to the obligations of an intermediary CASP. So this is only in instances where a crypto asset service provider, ordering crypto asset service provider, is making use of an intermediary, or a recipient crypto asset service provider is receiving funds from an intermediary crypto asset service provider. An intermediary CASP must ensure that all originator and beneficiary information that pertains to a cross-border crypto asset transfer is transmitted to the receiving CASP or another intermediary CASP in a transaction chain, as the case may be. And we've spoken about that transaction chain. An intermediary CASP must take reasonable measures to identify cross-border crypto asset transfers that lack the required information. And lastly, an intermediary CASP must develop, document, maintain, and implement effective risk-based policies and procedures determining when to execute, suspend execution, or return cross-border crypto asset transfers that lack any of the required information, and the appropriate follow-up action that the intermediary CASP will take in each instance where it executes, suspends execution, or returns a cross-border crypto asset transfer. These measures must be included in its RMCP. And I think, Michelle, this is quite an important point, as we know that crypto asset transfers are instantaneous. It happens immediately. There is no option to stop a transaction once it has been placed in effect. Therefore, the requirements for us to have procedures and policies in place advising specifically when you're going to execute, when you're going to suspend the execution, or return those cross-border, those crypto assets transfers that lack any of the required information is critical for us to see in your RMCPs that you produce when you are being inspected. So thanks for that, Michelle. Then we move over to the obligations in terms of a recipient crypto asset service provider. Here, a beneficiary of a crypto assets transfer is the client of the recipient CASP for purposes of the execution of the transfer. A recipient CASP must comply with the requirements relating to the verification of the beneficiary's identity in terms of the FIC Act and the RMCP. In respect of inward transfers, that is a single transaction valued at less than 5,000 rands from an originator in a high-risk jurisdiction. Again, we spoke about the FATF red flags that were identified. Here, I think we've put it into application in terms of Directive 9, where you will need to identify or have measures in place to identify high-risk jurisdictions or other monitored jurisdictions. The recipient CASP must verify the accuracy of the beneficiary information. So obviously, an ordering CASP would send the information that they've obtained about the beneficiary, and it's up to the recipient CASP, naturally, to then verify that information of the beneficiary that's receiving those funds. The recipient CASP must also take reasonable measures, which may include post-event monitoring or real-time monitoring where feasible, to identify cross-border crypto asset transfers that lack the required information. And I think this is another key point. Having some sort of tool or ability to monitor transactions on the blockchain is key. Without having any tools or having some sort of way to monitor the blockchain, it becomes very difficult to identify or to do post-event monitoring or real-time monitoring on any of the transactions that have been facilitated, either by the ordering or recipient CASPs. A recipient CASP must develop, document, maintain, and implement risk-based policies and procedures, determining, again, when to execute, suspend execution, or return a cross-border crypto asset transfer, and the appropriate follow-up action that the recipient CASP will take in each instance where it executes, suspends execution, or returns a cross-border crypto asset transfer. That's why we see the duty is placed also on the recipient crypto asset service provider and an intermediary crypto asset service provider to ensure that the information that has been directed in terms of Directive 9 is adhered to by the CASPs that has sent the virtual asset transfers to you. Should there be any missing information or non-compliance in that regard, there's an obligation on you to have processes in place either to return those funds or to suspend execution, and also importantly, consider reporting to the FIC.
Sure, Mal, this is a mouthful in terms of these obligations on your intermediary, your ordering, your recipient CASP, but that is not where Directive 9 stops. There are more obligations. One of those that deals specifically with immediate and secure transmission of the originator and beneficiary information. What does that entail? Why is this important even?
Yeah, no, thanks, Michelle. And I think this is also another important point for us to take note of, is with respect to transferring of information, we know that we're dealing with critical personal information from our clients, but also we're dealing with important information in terms of addresses, wallet addresses, reference numbers that apply, transaction hashes that apply to a crypto asset transfer. It's of absolute importance that this information is securely transferred throughout the transaction value chain to a recipient CASP. And that's why we harp on the fact that when a crypto asset service provider is engaging with another crypto asset service provider and transferring virtual assets, that they at least take some sort of due diligence of the fellow CASP to understand whether that CASP is able to receive the information that you are transmitting to. I think it defeats the purpose completely, Michelle. If we are going to be sending information, whether it be automatedly or manually, to another crypto asset service provider or to another wallet address where we are unable to control or protect the information that we're transferring. So importantly, yes, there needs to be policies in place for the secure transmission of originator and beneficiary information. And this will apply to accountable institutions that are ordering and intermediary CASPs. ordering and intermediary CASP must transmit the required information prior to or simultaneously with the transfer itself to the recipient CASP or intermediary CASP, as the case may be. This is another important point, Michelle. And I'm sure we'll touch a bit more about it on some of the observations that we've been making. But if the information is unable to be sent prior to the transaction happening or simultaneously with the transfer itself, it defeats the purpose of sending that information completely. A crypto asset transfer, as we've indicated, is instantaneous. It happens immediately. There's no way of pausing that transaction once it's been posted to the blockchain. And I think our crypto asset service providers are aware of that. So where you're unable to send this information securely prior to or simultaneously, essentially you are not complying with the travel rule. So having those measures in place to be able to do that, to assist you in doing that, is key. Then the ordering and intermediary CASP may transmit the required information in batches, which has been created in terms of Directive 9 as a way for you to transmit information. We do know that we've got larger CASPs that deal with thousands of transactions per day. Noting, however, that post-facto transmission of the required information is not permitted. So yes, we allow batch information, and we've seen instances where information is transferred prior to a transaction happening, and once they've received confirmation that information is correct and received, they go ahead with posting the transaction to the blockchain. So those are specifically for those instances. Then ordering and intermediary CASPs must transmit and store the required information in a secure manner and protect the integrity and availability of the required information to facilitate record keeping and to protect it from unauthorized disclosure. I think, Michelle, we've seen a lot of instances, especially in the crypto asset sector worldwide, where information has been hacked, information has been leaked, sold onto the dark web, funds have been abused, funds have gone missing due to the fact that there's not sufficient security measures put in place by the crypto asset service provider to ensure that information that it keeps is safe and secure. So I think this is another important measure that has been placed in terms of Directive 9 to ensure that both integrity and availability of the required information is kept. Another important thing, Michelle, is you'd see from the wording of Directive 9 is that we speak not only to availability, but also integrity. We know that when information is being sent, there's various means and methods that information can be stored. I think we've all come to realize that the blockchain is one of those methods that information is stored and kept safely, and by no means is Directive 9 dictating to you how and where you should keep your records, but it's important that you should be able to preserve the integrity of that information, and that information is capable of being reproduced should it be required from any of the supervisory bodies or the FIC. So yes, Michelle, that's in terms of our secure, immediate, I should rather say, and secure transmission of originator and beneficiary information.
Excellent, thank you, Mo. It's clear to me that rendering a financial service in terms of financial product, it comes with very unique responsibilities just due to the nature of the product. And I think it's very clear in the crypto asset space as well, where the travel rule then applies. To be very aware of the duties and obligations, and if the necessary processes are then not developed or implemented, it is then simply non-compliance. That being said, in this space, there's also the unique feature of unhosted wallets. And the directive deals with unhosted wallet transfers. Do you want to speak to that for the viewers?
Yes, no, Michelle, and I think, another key point in the crypto asset space is dealing with unhosted wallet transfers. I think our sector will be well aware that, when dealing with a centralized exchange, crypto asset exchange, one has wallets that is easily traceable to an entity, or we know that a supervisory body or the FIC or a law enforcement agency is able to go directly to that crypto asset service provider and query that address with a centralized crypto asset service provider. Unhosted wallets, as we know, is not hosted by a centralized crypto asset service provider. It can be a cold wallet. It can be a hot wallet that's hosted by peer-to-peer networks. It could be held by an individual person. The fact of the matter is there is no attributability to an unhosted wallet or an understanding of who that unhosted wallet belongs to, hence the word unhosted. In this respect, Directive 9 has come in and indicated that this applies to both ordering and recipient CASPs. What's needed here is that the crypto asset service providers must develop, document, maintain, and implement effective risk-based policies and procedures for the treatment of crypto asset transfers that involve unhosted wallets. So there is some recognition in terms of Directive 9, Michelle, where we understand that obviously entities are not barred completely from dealing with unhosted wallets. However, we note the increased risk that comes along with interacting with unhosted wallets. And hence Directive 9 then puts the obligation on ordering and recipient CASPs to have some sort of policy in place and risk-based measures in place to guard against sending crypto assets to terrorist related wallets or wallets involved in the use of money laundering or those involved in any sort of criminal activities. So hence an important policy in terms of unhosted wallets have been identified in Directive 9. The policies and procedures must include the manner in which and the process by which further information on the unhosted wallet is obtained in the case where the CASP determines that there is a higher ML, TF, and PF risk. Here, Michelle, we've noticed a use of various third-party sources, third-party applications that provide a crypto asset service provider with the option to screen addresses. And once you're able to screen an address, you're able to then identify whether that address belongs to another crypto asset service provider or if it is indeed an unhosted wallet that you're unable to identify. But the idea is that the institution should try its best to identify or to learn what type of unhosted wallet it is and who does it belong to, and are they confident enough to permit the transaction to go to that unhosted wallet, considering the risk or the increased risk that comes with it. This must all be documented in the RMCP. And important to note, Michelle, is that as of 30th of April 2025, there has been a joint publication from the FSCA and the FIC indicating that the travel rule has come into effect. All of our crypto asset service providers, old and new, should be aware of the travel rule and should have measures in place to assist it in complying with travel rule when transferring virtual assets or crypto assets. If you're unable to comply with Directive 9 or have measures in place to transfer virtual assets, note that you are in breach of Directive 9, and as indicated there, this is subject to an administrative sanction in respect of Section 45C of the FIC Act. We also refer you directly to Directive 9, which is available on the FIC's website. Thanks, Michelle.
So Mo, we said that we are assessing travel rule compliance or compliance with Directive 9, essentially. Let me be technically correct. I'm sure you and your team that deal with this on a daily basis have made some observations. Again, the benefit of sharing what we see with others so that others can learn from mistakes maybe made or gaps identified. high level, what do you and the team see that you want to bring to the attention of the viewers?
No, thanks, Michelle. You're quite right. So we have been seeing a few things when we go on inspections in terms of travel rule compliance, but I think most worryingly, Michelle, is that there hasn't been seriousness being taken from our sector in terms of implementing travel rule solutions or applying the travel rule. We see that institutions fail to provide for implementation of the travel rule in their RMCPs. I think the seriousness has been communicated in terms of the joint communication that has been sent out for travel rule to be effective from 30th of April. And I think there's been sufficient time that has been given to industry to familiarize themselves with the travel rule requirements and to apply those. So what we're noticing, Michelle, is not providing for the implementation of the travel rule in the RMCPs, having no processes in place, and still yet proceeding to transfer cryptocurrency to other crypto asset service providers who either are unable to receive the information or they don't have sufficient they're not able to transfer information in accordance with Directive 9. So I think this is the key objective of travel rule, like we've alluded to in the introduction, Michelle, is to ensure that information in terms of crypto assets and the client's information is being sent to a recipient crypto asset service provider, that we know who we're doing business with, we know who we're transacting with. We're not conducting a transaction or facilitating a transaction with a known terror financier or a money launderer, or sending funds to a wallet that's linked to a terror financing organization, which I think is critical and important. And I think we have sufficient case studies, Michelle, in South Africa and globally, where we've identified the transfer of crypto assets as being extremely high risk. We have instances where crypto assets have been used to facilitate terror financing. We have instances where crypto assets have been used to scam people out of funds. We have instances where crypto assets are being used to hide the source of funding that criminals are using. So we really need to emphasize the seriousness of obliging and complying with the travel rule, as this will definitely form part of future evaluations on our country and for the sector, particularly to ensure that we are complying with travel rule. Not only that, Michelle, this information assists in sharing, suspicious reports when we report to the FIC, in identifying to which countries, which jurisdictions are funds going to. We're able to then identify from good record keeping, as we've alluded to with suspicious reporting, that good records that are kept in terms of transferring information, we're able to then pass that on to law enforcement to enable them to identify jurisdictions, locations, persons for further investigation. So I think in terms of our observations, this is key, Michelle.
Yes, Mo. So if ever I think there was a very good example of compliance is not a tick box, and you need to comply for the correct reasons. The significance, the other side of the coin, so the significance of non-compliance, especially in this aspect, dire consequences, very high risk. So that concluding on the travel rule itself, I noticed, Mo, that you sport a very special background. I know that the FSCA is very inclined to share information, create awareness to promote positive change in compliance behavior, and build capacity as much as we do it internally, also externally. Build the relationship with our institutions we supervise, the sectors we supervise, looking for opportunities really to engage. Tell me about KSEF, or tell our viewers about KSEF.
No, definitely, Michelle. I think just as we're doing now, as part of our awareness initiatives, having our webinar series and reaching out to our crypto asset service providers, I think we've identified that as regulators or as supervisory bodies, in particular the FSCA, the FIC, and the South African Reserve Bank and the SSA have come together and we thought, let's create a forum where we're able to engage with our industry, our licensed CASP industry, where we're able to share our compliance expectations. We assist our institutions to comply with the FIC Act obligations. It's a forum for us to share money laundering, terror financing, proliferation financing risks. And I think it's a way for us, Michelle. We've noticed that working alone never helps anybody, but working together and bringing in our licensed crypto asset sector to these forums to be able to share knowledge. And the knowledge sharing is not only one way, I might say, Michelle. We also encourage information to be shared from our crypto asset service providers as well. So currently, in terms of KSEF, we are established and we host our meetings quarterly. Our first meeting was held on the 1st of August 2025, with our second KSEF engagement to be held on the 19th of August 2025. And like I said, this meeting is held quarterly. We send out an invite through our designated KSEF mailbox to our licensed CASP sector for them to come and attend our sessions. We request for presentations from our industry stakeholders, the FIC, the South African Reserve Bank, as I've indicated. And also we request for presentations from our licensed CASPs. So we approach certain CASPs to come through and provide input, provide presentation, and also allow them to volunteer to share information with us. So what happens is it becomes a great learning tool for both the regulator and for the regulated entity. And also we answer questions there as well, Michelle. Any questions or guidance that the sector may need, they pose those questions into the forum and we're able to then respond to them or get guidance from the relevant stakeholders and provide that information to our CASP industry. So we really see this as a partnership that we have with industry, and I'd encourage and implore all of our crypto asset service providers to come and attend these meetings and form part of our engagements. It's really constructive engagements, and it's us as a regulatory body saying, let's work together. So in essence, that's what KSEF is, Michelle.
That is absolutely wonderful. And I think, Mo, I'm thinking of the words of Madiba, the great man himself, who said, it always seems impossible until it's done. It looks like a mountain of work, but it is so empowering when you actually roll up your sleeves, you do your risk assessment, you understand who your clients are, you do the CDD, you identify the beneficial owners, record keeping, training, good governance, very importantly, your registration and reporting obligations. Start somewhere and do it intentionally. And like you said, the FSCA, certainly we want to be part of that journey and assist and support where we can. For that, I would like to conclude. Mo, I would like to really thank you partnering with me to bring the viewers this 5-part webinar. Like to thank the viewers. I hope that you are still with us. I hope you found the information we shared useful. Maybe you heard about these obligations for the first time. Maybe this was just a good refresher for you. Either way, we hope it was valuable. So we just want to remind you again that the series of webinars available on our FSCA YouTube channel. The intention is to make the slides available as well. That might make it easier for you to follow the actual presentations. And there's quite a few other webinars we have on our YouTube channel that applies equally to you being a financial services provider, and that may be very useful. So please visit our YouTube channel, visit our website, visit the FIC's website. There's really a lot of information for you. There's no reason for you to be uninformed, and knowledge is power. We look forward to more engagement with you, be it via recordings or newsletters or in KSF or any other possible forum, and wish you the absolute best with your AML CFT compliance journey. May it be a pleasurable one, an effective one, and one that we can all take pride in. Thank you.